If you're feeling overwhelmed, unsure about the future of your show, despite putting in all the effort, being on all the platforms, doing all the strategies, don't worry, you're not alone. You may find yourself constantly comparing your podcast to others, yet struggling even though you are following their exact step-by-steps. Well, today in part 2, we're talking to Krystal about why she is putting a pin in her second podcast, how she is doubling down on her main podcast, and how you can use these tools and these simple switches in your production, in your mindset to keep going. Because as she says, there's always someone listening to your message. There's always someone that wants your message. So just keep going. Keep it up because we all have to start somewhere. So are you ready? Let's go. Welcome to the Cure for Pod Fade. I am so excited you found your way here because that means you know how powerful podcasting can be. You are ready to build a legacy with your unique story, your message, and your offer, but you're getting a little overwhelmed. You're feeling frustrated, you're feeling stuck. You just don't know how to grow your show, find a new audience, and make some money. Podcasting can be the ticket to the life of your dreams, and it doesn't have to be as hard as you think. We're talking about all the ingredients it takes to be a successful, profitable podcaster without that icky overwhelm, because you are too magical to join the 85% plus club that pod fades away. I'm your host, Jen Dragonette, so let's make podcasting easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now, before we dig into the show, we have to shout out our sponsor. Hey, Cap Show! Thanks for being part of my team. So I have tried to hire, I have done all the things, you know me, over here, podcast producer and all, in making copywriting easy peasy lemon squeezy. And I have tried all of the ones that are built for podcasts and found that Capshow has so many features that makes it so that I am not spending hours and hours editing AI content. We all know that even if we hire a VA, most of the time we want to make simple tweaks. Well, Capshow is your content creation AI in your pocket 24/7. And the cool thing is the more you train it, the more it sounds like you. And it is even putting things in like easy peasy lemon squeezy into my copy without me asking for it because it just knows me. I feel like it's my new BFF in podcasting to make sure that it's not only creating all the copy that I need for all the different platforms, but it's also got a new creative studio that is making everything so much easier. So if you want to try for 14 days for free, go down into the show description and grab my special link. This is my gift to you because I want podcasting to be easy for you, because if it's easy, you're less likely to pod fade. And you know, we're all about curing pod fade over here. So let's get into our episode. You have these two shows, but now you're coming up on this decision to shut down one of your shows.
Yes.
And these are a big decision because as everybody's hearing is, and they know because they're like, I want to pod fade away. It takes a lot of effort to grow a show, and you've grown that show and you have listeners, you have people that are coming to that show. I want to know, why are you choosing to shut down, put a pin in the Potty Report and going all in on just the one show?
Yeah. So this is such a good question. And I told Jen from the beginning, I was like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the details, because I've shared a little bit, even on the podcast, of the Potty Report of what was happening, why it was shutting down. But it really came down to, it was earlier this summer. I was on a vacation with my family and I had done so much batching beforehand. We were going to be gone. We live in the Houston, Texas area, and we were heading down to the beach, and we were like, okay, like I want to enjoy it. I don't want to be like, oh, telling myself we're going to enjoy this, but I'm really like, I have my iPhone in, the room, and I'm like, oh, I'm just recording episodes, or I'm batching content. I have my iPad and I'm planning stuff. Like, I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to fully unplug and not worry about anything for Proffitt Media for 4 days. That's all. I just wanted to do that. And so I did. I batched a ton of content, and it was YouTube videos, podcast episodes, blog posts, newsletter, like everything was going out. And so in that space, I had time to really think. And that's when I was rereading Atomic Habits, and I was going through this one chapter where he talks about setting your environment up. So your physical environment, setting it up for success. And I was sitting there reading this book on the beach and watching my kids play in the ocean. And it literally was one of those things where this thought just arose in my head of, you need to let go of the potty report. And I was like, what? Wait, looking around, like, where did that come from? This is a physical space that has nothing to do with any of this. But that thought first arose, and immediately I was like, that is not happening. Nope. This is my baby. I love this show. I've been doing it for 3 years. Like, we're almost to 1,000 episodes. That was honestly the first thought that popped in my head. It's like, yeah, we'll talk about shutting it down once it's gotten to 1,000 episodes. That's the immediate thought that I had. But when I started thinking about it more, and I took a step back, and I tell people a lot, like, do a time audit of how long it takes you to do things. And if you find yourself spending so much time doing something and it's not having a return, then maybe it's time to evaluate that. So when I did that for myself, I was looking at the Proffitt Podcast, I was looking at my YouTube channel, I was looking at my newsletter, my Instagram, my website, all of these different places. The potty report was kind of out there on its lonely island, where because podcast SEO really sucks, that it's not growing because I don't have show notes for this. I don't really talk about it too much on social. I don't mention it in my newsletter. It's, again, going back to that creative outlet. That's all it was. But all of a sudden, as I was evaluating everything in my business, it became very clear it's also not bringing in any new leads to my business. There's not a ton of email subscribers that come from the potty report. It's not generating revenue because I don't have sponsors for that show. I don't really have the numbers to even go out and find sponsors. So it didn't really hit any of these key things that I was using to measure other areas of my business. And so it just came down to the time spent on a monthly basis to create and produce this show was no longer sustaining. It was no longer sustainable. Where it was just fun, it was this great thing. It was no longer sustainable because now I have other opportunities. So Jen, I don't know how much you know about this that I've kind of shared on the potty report here and there, but I have sponsorship opportunities for other areas of my content. I've had people reach out to me, and we're talking about creating content for them and doing social posts and all these other ads and just very fun adventures. And when I step back, I'm one of those, like, if I add something to my plate, I have to take something off. And when I'm evaluating it all, I was like, everything just kept coming back to the potty report out here on its lonely island being this thing that's really just fun for me. And I'm so glad that you said multiple times we're putting a pin in it, like we're shutting it down, but it's like, it's not forever. And that's the thing that I wanted to make really clear is, who knows what's going to happen? I could be like, I could say in December, I'm like, okay, guys, I'm back. I had like a 2-month break. That's all that I needed. We're back in the game. And that could be what happens. But at the end of the day, I just know for me right now, as of us recording this, for the rest of the year, I want to take a break from this podcast. But I didn't just have that thought and make that decision. I thought about it for a few weeks. And then it was finally really clear, if you want to make room for other big things to come into your content, then we need to take a break from something because you can't add anything else to your plate. You're already at capacity. So I hope that answers your question, but I'd be happy to go even deeper on any other part of it.
It does. And I think that this is something that even if you don't have a second show that we can kind of talk about is evaluating the areas in your business. So for me, I was realizing when I went through, I'm putting a pin in my other show as of October 3rd, and my heart breaks a little bit even saying that. But I had to evaluate. So where was I spending that time? Just like you. So that's getting okay, what else is not bringing in growth? Or because some of us aren't to the point where we're like, oh, we're profiting from our shows.
Right.
We're just trying to grow, get the audience, gain that know, like, and trust. So I think that we should talk a little bit about those evaluation pieces about, okay, For me, I gave up a lot of my Instagram. I'm going to be changing it over to an Insta site, spending less time there because I was bringing people in from TikTok and collaborations. Instagram and Facebook were not driving traffic either way, like warming them up or driving traffic. So I kind of want to go into that direction of your evaluation for people that maybe aren't to the place where they're getting sponsorships and stuff, because I think this is very valuable information for even those people. If you're thinking of putting a pin in your podcast before you've given it a chance, let's just evaluate where you're spending your time.
Yeah. And I think like the first thing that comes to mind is when we were talking about a second ago, it's like you have this on your plate. What can you add? You have to take something away. I think that what I was realizing is I was adding more things and then I was doing the podcast outside of what I had agreed to. Now, this is going to sound crazy to some people. It's okay. I'm fine. You can call me the crazy podcast lady. I will accept it gladly and wholeheartedly. But I have very strict boundaries around my time with my family, my time with work, my time like doing specific things. So I have hard stops. And whenever I was realizing the potty report was getting into the weekend, like I wasn't just doing it on a Friday afternoon anymore. It was happening on a Saturday morning. And then it happened every Sunday. And so when I looked back, we're talking about evaluating. I evaluated, why was this happening? Oh, it's because these other things were a higher priority. So that just kept, instead of me saying, well, the potty report is the priority, let me do that thing first. Instead, I was like, oh, I can make money doing the sponsorship. That is the priority. They need these deliverables. They need me to answer these emails. I'll go through these other processes. That was a priority. The potty report can wait. The potty report can wait. And when it finally got to the point of, oh my gosh, like it's been waiting. It's no longer fun. So this is the flip of the switch. It went from this is my fun creative thing to now it's a burden. It's like literally, I don't know if you're only listening to this, you can't see me, but I'm like literally flipping my hand over from it being fun to it flipped. And now it's a burden and it's dragging down other pieces. It's stressing me out. It's making me worried about, am I going to have enough time to do it? Am I going to give myself enough room to make it happen? Do I have the capacity? Like all of these things. So if you're evaluating your podcast right now and you're saying, okay, Krystal, I'm in the first 6 months. I feel so overwhelmed still. I thought it would get easier. But in reality, when you first launch a show, I feel like that is the most stressful that it will be, is the first 3 months of your podcast. So if you're there, I'm sorry, hang on. I promise you it gets better, but please don't quit, because on the other side of that 3 months is you kind of, the skies clear a little bit and you can see, oh, I really like doing this one thing, or I never want to do that thing again, or that interview was great, this interview was terrible. So you have to constantly put your content under the lens of, what do I really enjoy, and how can I use this strategy or use this content? Or maybe it's just a collaboration. You're networking with people and you say, I think I really want to take this relationship and let's go create a product together, or let's go do an interview. Let's go do a live stream together. There's so many beautiful things that can come from connections. But if you stop and you never make it to that clear skies, things like the clouds have parted and things look so much sunnier and happier and rainbows and butterflies are everywhere, then you'll never know what could have been with your show. So I always encourage people, make it to that first 3 months and then take a step back and say, what can I change? Because I have a good friend, Melanie, who and I'm going to call her out because she always says, you always call me out. I'm like, yes, I do. Because you said, yeah, she was like, oh, my podcast stresses me out. And I said, well, what part of it? Like, I put on my therapist hat. I'm like, okay, we're in therapy now. Let's just tell me what it really is. She's like, well, it's my I'm like, no, you can't just say your podcast stresses you out. What about your podcast stresses you out? And we started talking and we got to the root of it. And she didn't want to do show notes. She's like, I don't want to do show notes and I don't want to put them on my website. I hate that. And I said, don't do it. And she looked at me like, what do you mean don't do it? I can't just not do it. That's part of the process. And I'm like, you can't be so rigid with your processes that they aren't fun anymore and they're just stressing you. All the things I just talked about, they're stressing you out, they're pulling you down, you're not creative anymore. Like if that's where you find yourself and you're listening to this show, then stop what you're doing after you finish this episode. You got to finish listening to this episode, but you got to stop what you're doing and say, why is this stressful? Are you making it harder than it needs to be? Or are you trying to do things that are outside of your skill set? Because it could just be that messy middle of a learning curve, or it could be that, hey, you need to outsource that. You're terrible at that one piece. Outsource it to someone like Jen who can help you do better things with your podcast. But don't just sit there miserable and say, I just give up. I'm done with this, because you have a really important message to share. And I hope that you find all the tools that you need to get that message back out there and don't pod fade away, because yeah, we need your podcast.
Oh, I'm like, there's so many juicy little nuggets in there that I'm just like, ah. One of them is that your world needs your message. Like that's one of my core things. I just released a book. It's called Your Story is Someone's Life Raft. And I think that there's an intimacy in podcasting that is not on any other platform. And you mentioned the 3 months, and I have a client who's been podcasting for, I think this is her 5th year. Her show just started gaining traction. And I mean like big traction. Like we went from in the hundreds to now we're in the thousands in the first 24 hours. But it was that consistency piece.
Yeah.
It wasn't always easy. And the outsourcing piece, if you can't afford somebody to do it for you, there's so many cool AI tools that are affordable right now that's what happened to me. I got so wrapped up in creating graphics. It's one of the reasons that I have a hard time wanting to do a bunch of interviews on my show, and why my other show burnt me out so much was because, oh my goodness, now people want another story graphic. Now people want a square graphic. Now they want me to, I'm like, I'm a podcaster. Like I will give you something, but I think that we need to take a step back to that piece of the conversation, because we've been told we have to do all these things to grow our show. Well, this show, I have some social media posts. I have relied on my blog, my YouTube channel, and collaborations, and it's grown.
Yeah.
So I think that you made a very valid point of like what works for you, and kind of let go of some of that noise. And that's one of the things I've appreciated about learning about podcasting and content creation and marketing from you. Yes, you guys need to go over to her website. She has great free resources. Krystal is amazing. Like, just be in her space. She will help you, because she breaks down so many of these myths that we have to be all over the place.
Yeah.
And you see it on any platform expert. Be all the places. I'm like, no, get really good at one place.
Yes. Yeah. Especially with video. I cannot tell you, Jen, how many people I've met where they're like, I got into podcasting to not show my face. Like, I do not want to be on video, but everyone has video. Like, the amount of people that come to me and say, I'm starting a podcast. And I'm like, oh, awesome. Who are you going to host it? They're like, YouTube. I'm like, oh, okay. And it's nothing against YouTube channels. Like but it is a very different mindset when you go into something with saying, I'm going to be a YouTuber. That's one thing. But going into podcasting on YouTube, very, very different things, very different expectations. And if you're not a video editor, it's going to be an uphill battle if you don't outsource that. I'm just going to be very frank, very clear about that, because I have learned video editing. I edit all of my own videos, and it's something I'm actually looking at outsourcing, because it's like, I can't keep up with it. Like the expectations of consumers these days, right? They want the sound effects and the clips and the B-roll and like all these fancy things. And I'm like, I want to deliver that, but I don't want to do that. I do not have the capacity to learn how to do all these tools. And I'm just tired. Let's just be honest. After 500 videos, I'm tired, and I just want to do what I can do. If people want other things, then that's great. I'm not going to be for everybody. But at the end of the day, like, look at your capacity, like look at what you can do. And don't try to say, I'm going to be a podcaster on YouTube if you really ultimately don't want to be on video. Because I tried the whole, let's put up the graphic and put the audio file. You can do that. It's a way to get your podcast out there, but don't have the expectation that that will grow the same as someone who has a highly edited, highly produced video podcast show that has a whole team of people behind it. It's apples and oranges comparison. It's not going to work the same.
Yeah. The only nice thing is that I've noticed, because I have a couple of clients that just do the strict audio over an image, is that Google owns YouTube. So you get a little bit better SEO. But I want to know, because we talked about YouTube, when YouTube put podcast in, I want to know your feelings on that, because I have some very this is not a podcast. This is a glorified YouTube channel that we've slapped the word podcast on because it's not coming from my RSS feed.
Yeah.
I want to know, because we went down this rabbit hole of video podcasting, is it the same? Is it different? What was your view when YouTube was like, we have podcasts now?
They're liars, first of all. Let's just call them that. Because there is, so let me clarify. There is RSS coming to YouTube. They keep claiming this. I didn't go to Podcast Movement this year, but I read Pod News Daily. If you're a podcasting nerd and you want to know all the things, go subscribe. James Cridland has fantastic updates about podcasting, but he talked about at Podcast Movement, they unveiled RSS is coming to YouTube. If that happens, then yes, podcasting will officially be on YouTube. But for now, if you don't already know this, it's just a playlist. That's all it is. It's here's your categorized, you designated these things as a podcast. So here's a beautiful playlist for you to go listen to them. That's really how I see it. And yeah, I'll just stop there because it's disappointing, because I think it is very confusing for people that are very ambitious and they want this thing to work. They you know this, Jen, people have fiery passions around their message and they just want to get it out to people. But to have this false advertising that, oh, we'll just put it here and we'll give it to our billions of people that we have access to. It doesn't work that way. You can't just do this. The rules don't apply. The rules for each platform are different. I don't care what anybody says. It is different on Instagram than it is on Facebook versus YouTube versus your email newsletter. Every platform has its own rules and guidelines. And at the end of the day, I just tell people, share value. You have to share something of value, because that is what will attract the right audience for you. Notice I didn't say millions of people and tons of listeners. The right audience for you, the right people. Jen, she's gone on and on about the Potty Report, and I'm so thrilled because it doesn't have a lot of listeners. It really doesn't. But the people, I got some, it wasn't hate mail because they were like, Krystal, we love you, but I'm mad. I've gotten several messages and people are like, I am mad you're shutting down this podcast. I'm like, oh, dang. And then that let's get into therapy here. That starts this whole should I really shut it down? Should I not do it? But I'm like, no, I'm sticking to my guns. It's going to happen. But at the end of the day, add value to the content that you're creating. And that is how consistency over time, to your point of someone that's been doing this for several years, you don't know when it's going to pop. You don't know when that audience is going to find you. But if you keep adding value and you keep going in that message, I say this all the time, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. You just got to keep that message rolling.
Yeah. And going back to your point of do what you can. So for me, I can do basic video editing and that goes on my YouTube and it grows slowly.
Yeah.
Because I'm not overproducing it, but there is enough value there that there are still those some people. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't want to shut down my show, is because I've had people reach out that are some really dark times in their life that they've listened to an episode, and it's those people that don't speak up until you're like, I'm closing this down.
Yeah.
You're impacting someone regardless of the numbers that you have. So just keep going.
100%. 100%. And I want to go back to what you just said about, doing it on your own. I I'm such a big believer in sweat equity. So I have, and I say this very proudly, I have no debt on my business. Never have. There's no credit card debt. I didn't borrow money. I probably had like $1,000 to start with from the very beginning. And since then, I've tried to figure out ways to really use my own time, my own energy, my own efforts. And some people will say, well, that was stupid, Krystal. You wasted a lot of time. You should have hired this out and you should have done this and you should have done that. I learned all of these lessons to where now when I'm looking at things and evaluating, I can say, oh, I know exactly how I want this done. And I know exactly how these different processes are set up. I would much rather see people trying things themselves and saying, you know what? I can afford to outsource this. I'm going to go ahead and hire somebody to do that. Do that as opposed to, I have to outsource this and I'm going to go into debt to hire people and do all these things in hopes that it's going to work because, I mean, this shouldn't be a news flash, but it is. There's no guarantee that you're going to wake up tomorrow and have millions of downloads on your podcast. That's just the reality. But I think that with time and consistency, you can have a huge impact. You can grow an audience that's right for you and be able to really inspire and encourage them. And if your goal is to have a business on the back end, that really comes from people just knowing that they can trust you and that you show up and that you deliver. And you can really demonstrate that if you show up consistently in your content.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter how big that download number is on the back end. If they're the right people, what if you had 100 people that listen to your show and they were all 100 perfect buyers? Like, would you be happy then?
Exactly.
So the downloads to me, because I know like I keep seeing like Apple Podcast, get 50,000 reviews. I had to just try it just on I have a third show that I do a lot of testing that I highly don't recommend. And I was like, you said it was 50,000 Apple downloads. It didn't even show up. And who were these people you were marketing to? They're all bots. So
yeah,
really focus on, like you said, what's important to your business, what's important to your life, and be consistent because this is therapy. Like I think that podcasting for your soul is like my true essence to what I think. I think podcasting, it is a therapeutic thing.
100%. Yeah. And it's about connection. I've met so many incredible people that I never would have crossed paths with had I not started my podcast in 2018. So that alone is worth everything that I've done up to this point. So I'm so grateful for the network of people that I have. And it just keeps growing. So now Jen's in my network and we can collaborate and talk about all kinds of fun things. But it goes to show you that you just don't know what will come out of the thing that you have a passion for. And if you have that burning inside of you to start something or to continue something, I mean, I don't know if you want to go in this direction real fast, Jen, but one thing I'd like to talk about is pivoting. Like
Let's do it.
I started the Proffitt Podcast as a totally different show. I work with hundreds of podcasters that realize they start something, they're like, oh, I picked the wrong name, or I'm talking to the wrong audience, or I'm only doing solo. I really want to do interviews. Like there's so many different evaluations and I do see people pod fade, but the real solution to that could be, why don't you just pivot? My mom started a podcast. This is a funny story. She started a podcast in the beginning about gardening and it was 5 days a week. And it wasn't 5 minutes or less. It was like 20-minute episodes. Like she just had so much. She was just like word vomiting everything she knew about gardening. And then about that third month, she was like, I'm really tired. It's like she'd been running this like sprinting a marathon and she was like halfway through. She was like, I'm really tired. I think I need to do so. I was like, yeah, you're crazy for doing that in the first place. But yeah, let's rein that in. How about once a week? Does that work? She's like, yeah, I can do once a week. But the pivot is where I think the secret sauce is to not pod fading completely. And just whether it's taking a step back, it's shortening your cadence or shortening your content. People that are creating 30, 45-minute episodes, I'm like, hey, what if you just did 10 minutes? And they're like, oh, no one told me that was an option. I'm like, well, permission granted. I'm your genie for today. Like, just change it to whatever works for you and your schedule. There are no rules to any of this. There's some things that you should follow, some guidelines to make things work logistically. But outside of that, you can make it up. You can make it however you want. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm here for the cure for pod fade, like, what is it? Pivoting may be the thing that you should try before you say, I'm done with this. I can't do it anymore.
Ooh, like mic drop right there. So I normally end with what would be the one ingredient that you would want to add to the cure for pod fade, but would that be pivoting or would that be something else?
Oh, I would say pivoting is a good one, but I want to say margin and compassion. And what I mean by that is because we talked earlier about capacity, and that's when I know burnout is coming. If I feel that capacity, like the walls are closing in, I don't have time for this, like that's where I'm like, pause, where can we add the margin back in your life? But also the compassion, because people are just, we're too hard on ourselves. We are way too freaking hard on ourselves. We don't need anybody else to be hard on us. We're super hard on ourselves. So give yourself more of that compassion. If you're just in the first 6 months of your podcast, then say, this is my learning era. I'm thinking of Taylor Swift now. I'm not a Swiftie, but I'm thinking of like all her eras. And this is my learning era. I'm here to learn. I'm here to discover what I'm actually doing and figure things out. So just give yourself margin and compassion and space to do that.
Ooh. Well, thank you so much for joining me and adding all of these wonderful pieces to the cure for pod fade. And although I'm one of those people that's a little sad that the potty report is going, I know it will still be out in the world for people to enjoy. And I'll make sure to get all of your information in the show notes because you do have some resources that have really helped me in my journey. And it's always nice to have people in your space that are ahead of you. Like I always feel that there's room for all of us. So maybe you're listening and you're like, Jen's not my person to learn from, but I'm going to recommend highly get into Krystal's space because she'll take you to the next level.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate just this whole conversation today. And yeah, if you're listening, then just know that there is someone listening to your message and someone that wants your message. So just keep going, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. I had to just plug it and say it because it's just so fun. I need to hear it too. I don't just say that for other people. I need to hear that message often too. But yeah, just keep going.